Hello guys, David Vos here. Well, it is a beautiful day here in Alabama. It's nice and cool. Well, I should say it's a little bit cooler. There's some clouds. Hope you're having a wonderful day where you are. Well, friends, I'm going to go quickly and try to give you a lot of information in this video. The last video I did, I see a lot of people haven't watched it. I don't see a lot of people interested in all of this. It kind of hurts and saddens me because, I'm a little saddened anyway, a little bit, because I'd watched a video about the Amanita muscaria, and it was a man, I thought he was from Australia, I believe he's from Australia, and which I later found is a friend of Santos Bonacci, interestingly enough. But he just popped up on my feed. And he seems to be kind of a spiritual guy, a little like Santos, and kind of believing in some of the things that we're talking about, and a lot of things that Santos talks about. But he was, somebody had said, I don't know, somehow or another, I found he had a website where he sold Amanita muscaria. And so I went on that, and I ordered some. And when I went to the credit card deal, or how to pay, or PayPal, whatever, they said, well, we won't pay, we can't take PayPal, we have to do it manually. So it says, like, click which one you want. So I clicked PayPal, not knowing what it meant to do it manually, and I realized I had no idea what I was doing. I couldn't figure out what they wanted. So I was like, what do you do? And I couldn't go back. And then I got an email from this guy, and he's got this website. It's called Reindeer Amanita. Well, friends, I don't, what would you say, recommend going and buying from this man. And his character has been tainted a little bit in my mind, because he sent me an email right back. Somehow in my feed, somehow he sent me a message. I'm trying to think of how he sent me that message. It was, somehow I guess I gave him my email address, and he said very pertly, he was very sharp, and he was like, you want to buy this or not, or something kind of that effect. It was like, it was getting really weird. We kept, like, I'd send back, say, yeah, I'd like to purchase, but I didn't know what to do. And he'd send back a text, say, well, do you want to buy it or not? And I'm like, yeah. And what do I do? And he's like, well, go and subscribe to my channel and I'll get back to you. And I'm like, okay. And he sent me a link. Well, I went to this link, and it wasn't his channel. I thought he meant YouTube channel. Well, some other thing, some sort of a chat room or something, and I didn't understand what it was. So I wrote back to him and said, listen, I went to that place, but I didn't see where I would be able to subscribe, so I'm not sure what to do. Well, everything I said just kept more and more upset him. So he would write back something like a day later, like, well, you want to buy this or not? And I'm like, yeah, but can you explain to me how I can get you the money, and do you know my address? Well, he would never tell me whether he knew my address or not. Like, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to send you some money, and you're going to send me these mushrooms, but do you know my address? And he wouldn't answer me. And honestly, I wasn't rude at all, but finally got to a place where I said, well, it seems like you're being a little rude, and I don't understand what's going on. Could you please just let me know if you have my address? And yeah, I'll be ready to purchase. Well, he says, you know what? You just blew it, dude, or something to that effect. You just lost your chance. Bye. And it all disappeared. So I felt very hurt by that, because here was a man that I considered at first glance to be my brother, someone who was interested in this holy sacrament, and who appears to have some knowledge on the subject, and yet I cannot understand why he treated me that way. Anyway, I digress, but today, I want to try and do this video perhaps a little bit more, such a way that maybe more people would like to listen. Because this is the most important information that I think we'll ever know. And the information isn't just about some mushroom. That is the focal point of all of this information. The Holy Sacrament, that we might attain unto eternal life. But friends, this whole thing is a mystery. The whole history of man is a mystery, and where we all went and who we all are. And so to prove to you that these mysteries that we were talking about at the temple of Artemis, and what we're going to talk about now, we're going to kind of go back to where this all originated. Where were these Essenes from? Who is John the Baptist? What is this Essene group of people scattered all over the world? It has a lot to do with the scattering of Israel all over the world. And we find that there are these two covenants. Today we call them the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. But you see, it's always been that way. There was the Judeans who had this covenant of anger and vengeance and wrath and law. And then there was the other. And they were called, today we call them the Gentiles. But you guys know, we've been showing proof that the Gentiles are the lost tribes of Israel. And they're all over the world. And you got so much misinformation. You got people say, oh, they're all up in Europe. They're only white people. Friends, it's every tribe in the world. The 72 are the 72 deacons of the astrological wheel. It is every tribe. It is all the people. They've been scattered into all the earth. And they didn't just go to Europe. They also went to Africa. They went to China. They went to everywhere. It's all the peoples of the world. And it's a circle, and it fans out in a circumference from the geographical center there in Egypt and goes all over the world. So what I want to show you is where these people went and where one particular group went. Now remember, we're just talking about the royal bloodline, because the rest of the Israelites are lost and we won't know where they're at. We know where they're at. They're everywhere in the world. And we can surmise that they're Israelites from their traditions and their religions. But why do they have these religions? Because modern people think that those are all pagans. Well, the word pagan means nation. And they have another covenant. It's the same covenant that we see there at Pentecost, where they were speaking the glossolalia and the dancing and the ecstasy and the apparent drunkenness. It seems like these people were dancing and singing, and they were saying all these things that people couldn't understand, and doing things people couldn't understand. And it is exactly what we find in the mysteries at Artemis and other places around the world. But what we want to find out is, where did these mysteries at Artemis begin? Because remember, the priests of Artemis were Essenes. What I'm about to tell you, you'll go like, what? And you'll try to go look it up, and you're like, well, I'll be darned. It is. Well, how come people don't know this? Why aren't people telling us this? Because it's a mystery. It's been hidden. So where did this other mystery, the mysteries, right? The other covenant of ecstasy and eternal life, the holy, Arios Gamos, and all of the mystical rites, where did they come from? The ones that aren't like Judea, which is the rest of the world. They all have the same priesthood. Well, we can trace it back to the Eleusinian mysteries. The Eleusinian mysteries, who and what are they? Well, it is so amazing, friends, because the whole story of the Eleusinian mystery starts with this story of the Elysian fields. And guess what grew in the Elysian fields? A little flower called narcissus. Narcissus. That is the word in Greek. It's come down to us as narcos, or narcotic. Narcotics that's a drug. And these flowers grew. I mean, these flowers all over the world, these flowers that mankind never eat, because we're never told that you can eat the fruits of the field. But the flower is the blossom, the bud, which beneath the fruit grows. So if you look at all the different types of flowers, I mean, you've got now this narcosis flower is the secret ingredient in the Eleusinian mysteries, in their sacrament. What is it? Narcos. Well, it's the daffodil. But we've never, it's so crazy. I mean, for years they made it illegal to buy pot, right? Oh, we don't want the public having this information. Or opium's illegal, right? That's from a flower, the opium flower. Well, there is the lily, right? The Buddha was born from the lotus flower. There is the morning glories in Mexico. We've got there's so many different ones, but the daffodil's one that blows my mind because it was the center of the ancient mysteries of the Eleusinian traditions. And we'll get back into that. Remember, it's not just one particular flower. It is a mystery. There are many flowers and many, remember, the leaves are for the healing of the nations. And each has a particular purpose. But what we want to do is, before we get to the exact ingredients and what this sacrament was and all these holy mysteries, I want to, before we get to that, prove to you that these mysteries are from the Lord. This is the Christian mysteries. That Jesus, when he came in and turned the water into wine, was saying, I am fulfilling the mysteries of Dionysius. Dionysius was the original figure back in in the Athenian Greek tradition of Troy. These were the original mysteries. And they lasted for for thousands of years. The world was going to these temples and receiving these initiation rites. And we want to know what they are because they have been lost to mankind, because the deity was jealous. The God of vengeance said, you will not bow down to them and you will not worship them. I am a jealous God. And he went forth to conquer and to he teaches my hands for warfare. He went to genocide and to kill all who would not accept slavery at their hands. So who were the other people? Well, Moses led some of them out of Egypt and they became a people, and we've got the story in the Bible. But that wasn't the end of it. I want to tell you another little part of the story, and it is in the Bible. Okay, remember, all scripture is inspired and beneficial for teaching and reproving, and scripture means script. And the original word for that is glyph. So the hiero, which is holy, just like the aerogamos, or the holy marriage. So the hieroglyph is the holy words, the holy book, the holy writing, the tablets of destiny, which is, our names are written in it. How could our names be written in this book? Well, it's written in the stars, and everyone has their own star. So, where did these people of Athens, these Eleusinian mysteries, come from? Well, let me read you from Diodorus Siculus in Bibliotheca Historia. It says, the aliens were driven from the country of Egypt, and the most outstanding and active among them banded together, and as some say, were cast ashore in Greece and certain other regions. Their leaders were notable men, chief among them being Danos and Cadmos. Friends, Danos is a very interesting person. This is the man that started the Dardanos, and his brother Cadmos made a kingdom in Thebes. Well, they started the Greek-speaking peoples. They began to take over the whole Mediterranean area. Members of the children of Israel, as they were scattered, they began to go all over the world, into Africa, Morocco, down into Timbuktu, way down all over Africa is where they eventually went, and all the way up into Europe, and up into the Iberian Peninsula, which is the word from their ancestor Eber. The great-grandfather of Abraham was Eber, and they called themselves, after Eber, the Iberians. Now, the Iberian Peninsula used to be mostly all of Spain, and it went on up, all the way up into Britain, actually. They had conquered the entire area around the Mediterranean, from around the southern part into Africa, east all the way to India, north all the way up into England, and also in Russia and everywhere. These were all children of Israel. They went north, east, west, and south. But one tribe, which is the only tribe that retains its knowledge of who they are. Because the rest of them, the Bible says, became blind and they were lost. And Jesus said, I send you only into the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That's it. Christianity only went to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which is all nations, tribes, and tongues. So, this Danos is a child of Judah. And this is the royal bloodline. So, we find in the Bible in 1 Chronicles chapter 2, and the sons of Zerah, Zimri and Ethan, and Heman and Calcol and Dara, 5 of them in all. So there's a guy named Dara in the Bible that's the son of Zerah. Now, I want to show you this little article I read here by John D. Kaiser. And it says that, let us now turn to that other part of Zerah's descendants which fled out of Egypt under the leadership of Darda. In the authorized version of the Bible, this name is spelled Dara, but in the margin, the alternate spelling is Darda. And the Jewish historian Josephus calls him Dardanus. This is significant because the group which he led went northward across the Mediterranean Sea to the northwest corner of what we now call Asia Minor. There, under the rule of Dardanus, they established the kingdom later called Troy on the southern shore of that narrow body in the water which bears its name to this day, Dardanelles. Did these bands of Israelites refugees stay in Greece and Asia Minor, or did they migrate further to distant lands? We have the Greek geographer and historian Strabo says Danos, having arrived in Argos, made a law that all those who had borne the name of Pelagiote throughout Greece should be called Dani. We further learn from Strabo and others that this Argos soon spread its name to the Peloponnesians and afterwards to all Greece, for he says Homer calls the whole of Greece Argos, for he calls the Argives, as he calls them, Dani and Achai. So, Hecatus therefore tells us that the Egyptians, formerly being troubled by calamities, referring to the 10 plagues of the time of Exodus, in order that the divine wrath might be averted, expelled all the aliens gathered together in Egypt. Of these, some under their leaders Danos and Cadmus migrated to Greece, others into other regions, the greater part into Syria. Their leader is said to have been Moses, a man renowned for wisdom and courage, founder and legislator of the state. Afterwards, many Mosaic institutions followed. The calamities referred here are obviously the plagues which Jehovah brought down on the Egyptians, and the aliens are clearly the Israelites, some of whom migrated into Greece with Danos and Cadmus. Others, under the leadership of Moses, made their escape to Palestine. So, this is a real thing in history, and it's all over the ancient historians' documents, and we can find it in every nation that they refer to these peoples as the children of Israel. But remember, the story of the Bible tells us there will be 2 lines of Judah, Zerah and Pharez. But let me just read that again real carefully. The Israelites were driven from the country of Egypt, and the most outstanding and active among them banded together, as some say, were cast ashore in Greece and certain other regions. Their leaders were notable men, chief among them being Danios and Cadmos. But it continues. But the greater number were driven into what is now called Judea. The colony was headed by a man called Moses, outstanding both for his wisdom and for his courage. So, the historians, we've had this in our history books all along. And every historian knows this, but everybody just sort of, well, for a long time they thought the history of Troy, these Dardanians, it was all mythology. They didn't believe it. But we have now found the city of Troy. And we now know that this is not, it's like the Bible. People don't believe it. They think it's mythology. But this is the ancient history that we have. So what he's telling us is that the Israelites didn't just go to Judea. They went all around the world. And he specifically mentions this man named Danios. And if you go into the Bible, you'll find he was the son of Judah. Judah had 2 sons. And there was a prophecy because one of his children was Zerah and one was Pharez. And there was a red ribbon tied around one of them. There was supposed to be some sort of a breach that would occur. And that one day that breach would be healed. So there would be 2 lines of the ruling class from Judea. Evidently, one of the Judean ruling classes went with the Judeans, and another one went to Troy. And you see, this is what I've been talking about for a long time. This is why there were not just 2 covenants, 2 mysteries, 2 nations, the Israel and Judea, but there were 2 lineal descendants and 2 prophecies, and Jesus was not the fulfillment of the Judean Messiah, but he fulfilled not Judah's prophecy that the scepter would not depart from Judah until he would come as a legal right, but he fulfilled the lineal descendant from Joseph, because it says in the New Testament, he is the stone that the builders rejected. Who rejected it? Judea, who sold Joseph into Egypt. And the Judeans who were now betraying, like Judas betrayed Jesus. And Jesus was that stone that they rejected from Joseph, from the 10 tribes. That would be a multitude, receive the blessing from the favored wife Rachel, his firstborn son Joseph. But we can trace who this Dardanus is back to Judah. And we can easily see that the other brother was another one of the sons of Judah. But this is talked about in other places of the Bible. It's not like we're just some coincidence here of these guys' names being similar. But notice what it says in Kings chapter 4, verse 30 through 31. It says, "And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country, and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Chalcol, and Darda." You see, Darda is that Dardanians, or the child of Judah, the Dardanians went and founded Troy, and Chalcol, who founded Thebes. So he was saying that Solomon was wiser than the people in Europe, north. He was wiser than the ones in the south, in Egypt, than the ones in the east. He was the wisest of all. And Solomon was the king of the lineal descendant of Judah, of Pharez. But there was another lineal descent through Zerah. But understand, we're not talking about one little tribe, like refugees amongst a tribe of nations or peoples that the Lord don't care about and doesn't even name, right? When he names these individuals going into these areas, they became those people. For instance, we hear a lot about the Phoenicians, as though that is a different group of people than Israel. But just as Troy was of the lineage of Israel, of Judah, so was the Phoenicians. Remember, Phoenician, that's where we get the phonetics and the Phoenician language. They were the ones who invented the present script that we're using, the little letters we call the alphabet. Why? Because Enoch, or Phenox, that is the tradition that they were the ones who were keeping the wisdom of Enoch. Well, they weren't Enoch's children, were they? Well, in a sense they were, because Enoch was a lineal descendant from Adam, and through Enoch came David, and all of the Judeans traced their lineage from Enoch. So they were the Phoenicians, and they are the ones with the great mysteries, and they lived in an area today we know at that time was a territory of Israel. They were Israel. They were in the land allotted to the tribe of Asher, and that's where Tyre and Sidon were. Remember, Sidon is a name where Dan lived, because Dan named everything after himself. He named the Jordan and the Sidon after himself. And Dan was dwelling in ships. the Bible says. We know then that the Danites were probably, if not the entire group of Phoenicians. I mean, we can't imagine that the Phoenicians were one ethnicity completely and wholly and absolutely, and they didn't have any foreigners. So we don't know exactly, who all were there. But for the most part, we know that the Phoenicians were the tribe of Dan. And they went from Tyre and Sidon to Cyprus. They inhabited that and colonized it. They went to Cilicia, Cyrene. They went to Miletus and all the way along Italy and up in through the Iberian Peninsula, all the way into Ireland and England. These people were colonized because the Bible says they dwelt in ships. And you can follow the trail of Dan, the London and the Danube and the Dniester, and we've talked about this. So the Phoenicians were Israelites as well. In history, we also know that the Greeks talk about in their history that they were attacked by a group of Dorians. Well, the Dorians were from the people of Dor, which is in the coast there of the Mediterranean coast in Judea, where the Manasseh tribe was dwelling. These were of the tribe of Manasseh. And they had a city called Dor, and they became known to the Greeks as the Dorians. Well, we can read in the Antiquities, chapter 12, where it says, Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, to Onius sendeth greeting. We have met with a certain writing, whereby we have discovered that both the Judeans and the Lacedaemonians are of one stock, and are derived from the kindred of Abraham. Friends, this is history. There is no doubt that these individuals up in Greece, and later we'll find they ended up starting the Roman Empire. Annius was one of the children of Danis. Annius went to Italy, and this is where we get the Romulus, who was born from Annius and one of the gods. So again, the royal bloodline picks up, and the mythologies start there in Italy, and they start the Roman genealogies and the emperors and the lineal descendants that made the Caesars. Well, all of these lines go back to the royal bloodlines, and there's only one royal bloodline, and that is Judea, or Danius and Chalcol, Zerah and Pharez, one of the royal lines being there in Israel. We talked about how Babylon wanted the highest they could get. They wanted the royal bloodline to rule over them so they could be the chief ruler of the world. And therefore, Solomon married Bathsheba and had a child, and that child was Nebuchadnezzar, and he became a world ruler. The Bible in Ezekiel tells us in chapter 16, I believe, or 17, that there is a cedar tree, which is the royal bloodline of Judah. And there are many branches. And many of these royal bloodlines were placed all over the world. And one of them was taken to a city of traffic, which is Babylon. So, we know that Daniel was of the tribe of Judea. He became the head of the Magi. Remember, Magi is the priesthood of Egypt, the magic practicing priest that met Moses, who also had the power of the serpent, or the wisdom, the esoteric wisdom. But Moses threw down his staff, and it became a serpent, and it ate their serpent. So Moses had the greater of the wisdom, as Solomon had the greater wisdom. The Bible makes that very clear. But there were others who had these serpents, who had this knowledge, they had these temples. But Moses was a priest of El, of Jethro. Remember, Jethro's other name is Ruel. So he had the Melchizedek priesthood, like Jacob, who became Israel, who got the teachings of El, received it from Melchizedek, and his God was El Elyon, which is the Most High. In Israel, in the northern 10 tribes, they worshipped El. They worshipped at Bethel, which is the house of El. So we know then that this Judaism is something that got started after the great sin of Rehoboam and Jeroboam when they split, and the 10 tribes then were no longer part of the Judeans. And it wasn't very long, and the Assyrians came down and took the 10 tribes of Israel and scattered them in all the world. They went up by the Baltic Sea, which is not really very far from the Greece, Athens, and that whole area. But it's a general area going north from Israel. This is where they went. This is where they scattered. There are histories and people who acknowledge that many of these tribes of Israel that were scattered there met up with other Israelite brothers. They sent letters as the one that we just sent and said, yeah, we're all the same tribe. We're all of Israel. All the world is one. We're all brothers, and our religion's the same. But yet, there was this one group of people called Judeans that went into apostasy, and they went down into Babylon, it says. And they were sort of excommunicating all the other tribes because they were worshiping the Holy Mother. So Yahweh says, I don't like the woman anymore, and we're excluding her, and we're going to put her under a veil and make her a slave, and you're never to listen. Put a veil. Don't listen to women. Well, that is a reference, a sort of a symbolic reference to this mystical thing that happened. The two teachings, mysteries, by receiving them through the Holy Spirit, the Divine Mother, and others who simply went by the material outer law. And these were the two mysteries. And they have come down to us, but Yahweh has forbidden us to partake of these mysteries. This is why they killed Jesus on that cross for blasphemy. Because he was an apostate, they claimed. They shunned him. They knew exactly who he was. They knew he was the promised one. And they understood these mysteries. The Jews did very well. But it was an effort to stamp it out and to keep men in slavery. Because that's what Yahweh had always said. I am God and there is none else, and I forbid you to go after the other deities. And I forbid you to know these mysteries and to become like God. He did this from the very beginning, right there in the Garden of Eden, where he told Eve, you will not partake of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is the holy sacrament. And there was the serpent saying, you will surely not die, but you will become like God. This is the initiation rite to become like God, but Yahweh forbade it, and he has always forbade it. And this is why there was this split. Because the bottom side of the wheel, the darkness, was demarcated and split off from the light side of the wheel. Both of these things are necessary. When we're children, we're like babes. And so we don't get the full reign of the house. We don't get all of the power. We're an heir, but we don't get to sit on our throne yet. So the Bible likens it to that. And he also likens it to the fact that we need the nighttime to sleep. But we don't get anything done at night because we're sleeping. But we need that time. See, so it's not like these two sides are exclusive. They're needed. But what has to happen is they have to become one. The man and the woman must become one. And he must lift the veil. There has to be a wedding, a ceremony. And so Solomon united the two tribes, or the north and the south. David united the united kingdom of Israel. And this is what Bible prophecy is predicting for one day when the two lines from Judea will become one and the breach will be healed. This is what all of this prophecy is talking about. But we could follow these Phoenicians and the children of Dardanus and the children of Chalco, the Thebes in Greece. We can follow all of their ancestors. Well, we get to the area up around Spain, which was called the Iberian Peninsula. There was even an island called Iberian up in that region. And we find that there was a great legend. Their mysteries and what they taught in their histories is that they were called the Tuatha De Danann. Now, the tribe of Dan, as we've said, was the Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians had already settled the Tuatha De Danann. Now there is a possibility that the Tuatha De Danann is the tribe of Danus from Judah. We do not know if the Tuatha-De-Danann are the royal bloodline from Judah, or if they're the children of Dan, but either way, the Bible is saying that they're going to collide. They're going to become some sort of focal point, leading the people away and conquering and expanding and being this one lineal descent that was Israel, that scattered and went all the world. So the Tuatha-De-Danann, histories say, ended up having a royal bloodline that came from Egypt. And their royal bloodline came from a woman they called Tia-Tipi, which came from Egypt. Talks about Jeremiah in their history books. There's a place in the book of Jeremiah where Jeremiah had this maiden and he took her to some faraway place, but the Bible doesn't tell us where. Well, we picked that up in Ireland. Jeremiah came with his scribe Baruch to the island of Ireland. And there he brought with him this stone. Well, many say that is the stone that Jacob laid his head on, and it was handed down to Joseph, because it says in the prophecy of Joseph, to him shall be the stone of Israel. So that particular stone is so important to the Irish. It was where they crowned their king. They called it the coronation stone. And that stone was then taken to Scotland and then finally to Britain or to England. And it is the root of this royal bloodline that ruled over all the world from Britain. So you have a lot of white supremacists that are like, oh, see, this means that only white people are the rulers of the world. We're the Israelites. And you also have black people that say, no. They found some stories where they're of Israel. And you can find many of these tribes in Africa that claim they're the children of Israel. Friends, all the people of the world, that Native Americans in America, Joseph Smith said, were tribes of Israel. So what is the significance? Why is it that these Europeans are running the world? Because that's the tribe of Judah. They are the royal bloodline. And of course, they're the ones who are blind and make the laws and bring us into bondage. However, there is going to be a healing. And there were certain mysteries that were taken with them, that were given to them. So you might think, well, okay, if Dan is a bad guy, because you talked about Dan in other places, Dave, and you were talking about how Dan was up in the northern part of the territory of Israel. And they had some Levites go up there and they started this false religion. It's right there in the Bible. It was false religion. Well, there were three places that the Israelites would worship. One was at Jerusalem, one was at Dan, and one was at Bethel. So the 10 tribes had two places. They had Bethel, which was the house of El, the true mysteries. And they also had Dan, these other fabricated mysteries that were all made up by Dan. Well, I shouldn't say it's made up by Dan. And that would be another interesting video to make. We ought to probably do a whole video on that, because you see, Dan went north of all the other tribes. I mean, originally, before he got in his ships and went all around the world, he went all around the world, probably by the help of the devil, right? To spread his false religion. But originally he went up to this other place, Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon, the mountains of Bashan, is up by Syria. See, it's up on the border of Syria. And that is known to be the great temple of Pan, or Dan. And that was a false religion, but it was also a place where, in the esoteric wisdom and all of the Apocrypha and ancient scripture, tells us that the angels fell and made a pact on Mount Hermon. And so the fallen angels, that's where Og, king of Bashan, is, which I've said, interestingly enough, Og may very well be Gog, which is the deity over the Rephaim, or the dead, or not just any of the dead, but the dead of the giants, the Nephilim, who had relations to the daughters of men and had these offspring, or these giants, that when they died, became the dead, or the Rephaim dead, who are like the demons that rule the world. And so that gives you kind of a clue as well. Remember, we were talking about John Dee, and him and Edward Kelly, they talked to these spirits, and they started the whole movement, the Freemasons. You know, John Dee and Edward Kelly were basically the forerunners to Francis Bacon, and they started the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons and so forth. So they had these mysteries, but they weren't really the true mysteries. They were from the demons. That's why they were opening up the spirit realm. And you see in the painting, when you look at the X-ray beneath the painting, because it's been painted over, but the original painting was showing the truth about John Dee retrieving their messages from the dead. There were skull and bones. Hence, we have the organization called the Skull and Bones, which is the real truth behind what this occult today, the modern occult or the hidden, not the originally the word occult came from the true Christians hiding the truth because they were going to get killed, you know, or just giving out certain information. Like Paul says, it was unlawful for a man to speak. You had to go through these initiation rites. But John Dee and Aleister Crowley and individuals, they didn't want to be righteous and go unto the elders like Simon Magus went to Peter and asked for these things and asked to pay money to have these things. Well, they went right straight to Satan. They opened up the ability to have visions, but they listened to demons and not to the angels. So that is where the whole system we have today comes from, and this is proven by the fact that John Dee brought up these spirits from the dead, or the skull and bones, which is where Yale has a temple and secret rites that they bring in certain individuals like Bush, and John Kerry was a member of the Skull and Bones, and these are a secret order that runs the world today, and they're evil, and they are listening to demons, and that is absolutely proof. So Dan, being up there, ended up making a pact also with the giants, or this satanic teaching back to this God who fell upon his mountain. Another story is Yahweh, this angel that fell, like Galatians tells us in Colossians, that the Judean religion was the worship of angels. So what we find in Europe is that Dan's mystery religion took over. That became the Druids, or the worship of Odin. And this is where we get the word God today, because these northern tribes that were ruled over by this mystery religion that is the bad mystery religion, which is the dark side, which is only interested in greed and money and conquering the world like Dan did on his ships. They became known as the Goths, or certain tribes. They were all white. They're called the Great White Brotherhood. They were racists. They thought and believed that they were the only chosen ones. Well, they were only one tribe, of course, not all 12. Because remember, the other 10 tribes are lost. And so, you know, in the German Third Reich, they were talking about the motherland and the fatherland and bringing back the white brotherhood and all of this. Well, they were mistaken. They were following after the Druid religion, which was purposefully created by the children of Dan, and they're the ones who left their brethren and got on ships and went around to conquer the world. We've talked a lot about this in other videos, but Odin was pronounced Godin by the Lombards, which is the area of the Goth. That's the area that the Lombards took over there in Italy, which became the church in Rome. And so Rome was taken over by the Goths in 405, the Visigoths, and the Lombards. Now the Lombards then ended up taking over the church. It was a great apostasy by Dan, and they began to worship Godan, or God. So the original manuscripts of the Holy Scriptures use Theo, or Theos, everywhere that there was the word deity. Well, when the Germans came down and took over Italy, the Lombards, they replaced it with their god, Woden, which is Dan and his demonic devil god. So that is where the apostasy took hold in a real way, when mankind was deceived into going after not just Yahweh, turning back like a dog to its vomit and going back under the law, apostatizing, but going all the way back to the point where we no longer even knew the name of the Father. I mean, not only did they go back to the worship of Yahweh, which was a fallen angel, but were able to get a glimpse of how this God at the bottom of the wheel became worshipped by demonic influences that used Dan as, you know, because our ancestors, they would deitize. You know, Jacob became a deity, and Adam became the deity. These were the ancient patriarchs, but in mythologies and stuff around the world, they were considered the gods. So Dan became one of the deities, and his father was Yahweh. So the people in the northern part, or the 10 tribes, some of them started going and worshiping at Dan's altar in this new religion, because they thought it was too hard, too much trouble to go all the way down there to Bethel to worship. It was just too far, and so they made their own religion. Well, they took it with them when they went on their ships, and they created the Druid religion, which is the same religion spoken of there in the Bible. And they had Judean Levitical priests. So it was a type of Judean religion, but it was the one that accepted the belief of the law and government and slavery and all of these things. The other group of individuals were the true mysteries that were taken along to Troy, and they created the Eleusinian mysteries. And these were the mysteries that were up around this area: Anatolia, Turkey, Greece, Syria. These were the mysteries that today we call the Mithraism or Zoroastrianism. It was the same ancient mysteries that the Bible says is good, because Elijah raised the widow's son. The widow's son is symbolic of the priesthood being raised back. There was a famine. Well, it's a spiritual famine. And the world was beginning to fail, and there was apostasy going on. And so Elijah, being the great prophet who had the great vision on Mount Horeb of the mountain of light, got a direct revelation from the divine Father of heaven and the divine mother, and heard the still small voice within, went up the mountain of light. And he went, and instead of going to Israel and raising up one of their sons, which would mean, raising up their priesthood to power, Elijah went to the woman of Zarephath, which is up in Syria. And in fact, he went to a mountain called Mount Carmel and started the mysteries there. And they became the great mysteries. So these mysteries were from Elijah, who was of the 10 tribes, who worshipped at Bethel, and later reinstituted these mysteries up in the area around Ephesus. And the priests there were called Essenes. And these were the original mysteries that we know today as the Eleusinian mysteries, the Dionysius mysteries. That's why Jesus came in, turned the water into wine. That was his signature, Dionysius' signature miracle that showed in these mystical rites that they were the one who had that dynamic power from the gods, who could give this elixir of life. Because only the true Father could give life. And the mysteries, whoever had them, were the ones who would lead the people to righteousness. And this was from Elijah, and Jesus recognized him, because Elijah said, this one, Jesus, is the one that I'm directing you to. Not the Judeans. See, the Judeans and Herod and these guys, they beheaded John for his testimony. He said, go follow Jesus. Well, who was Jesus? Well, he was a Galilean from the northern area. And his disciples were up around that area. And they were in the desert disciples of John the Baptist. They were Essenes. And Paul, when he preached, went all the way up in that area. And I will show you some verses in Paul's writings that will prove to you that these people up in Ephesus, Thessalonica, Colossia, all of these areas were children of Israel. But now, just before we do that, I just want to say again, because I don't think we covered it well enough, that the Romans, their traditions say that they came from a man named Aeneas. Aeneas was a descendant of the Trojan lineage back to Danaus. So they were of the tribe of Judah, the royal bloodline. So when Aeneas went around wandering and went to Italy and created Rome, Romulus, they called themselves the Roma, or the Romans, they give the story of their divine genealogy going back to Judah, son of Jacob, son of Abraham. This is a fact that the royal bloodlines ruled the world. So, Julius Caesar then was a descendant of Romulus, who was a descendant of King Judah, son of Jacob, son of Abraham, son of Adam. And you see a lot of stuff in the Bible that explains this, or basically is saying this, but we have been trained to ignore everything in the Bible that tells us the truth. Notice in the book of Daniel how it says that when it's talking about the Romans, it says that there shall be a prince that shall come, that shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And Daniel 9 verse 26, it says, "And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end war, desolations are determined." But he calls Rome a prince of the host. Well, the host is the peoples, or the armies of Israel. And the prince, one of the prince, has to be from the tribe of Judah. So you see, Daniel's telling us these things, but we are not trained to understand this. But we pointed this out before. The epistles of Peter talk about certain areas, and he says these are the ones that are children of Israel, the diaspora. And he names places all up there around Greece and Italy and the Aegean and stuff like this. And, the same places that Paul went to go and preach to, the Colossians and the Corinthians and all of these. But notice what Paul says in the book of Romans. He says, "Because knowing the Lord, they thought of him not as the divine one, nor were they thankful, but they changed the estimation of the incorruptible Lord into a resemblance of an image of corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and reptiles." So here he is saying that mankind turned. They once knew the Lord, but they turned into idolatry. How did they once know the Lord? Because they were the children of Israel. But he did the same thing in all of his letters. I think every one of Paul's letters, maybe except for the book of Hebrews, which some people don't even know if Paul wrote that, but all of Paul's letters, and all of Peter's letters, and all of John's letters in the book of Revelation, the first 2 or 3 chapters, he says to the 7 congregations, and they're all up there around Asia Minor. But Paul says in Corinthians, "Now I do not wish you to be ignorant, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all had passed through the sea." Our fathers? Who is the fathers that Paul is saying is our father? He's talking to Corinthians. Well, he's talking to the diaspora, David. There's a handful of lost Israelites in that town, in a little congregation, holed up in some hole in the wall. No, he's talking to the people of Corinth. And he says, "Don't be ignorant, brethren. You're the children of Israel." Notice in the book of Galatians, I think in around the 3rd chapter, Paul says that the law had been a tutor for Christ. Well, how is the law a tutor that led to Christ? This has been something that Christians have never been able to explain. Why is Paul telling the Galatians that the law was a tutor? They were never under the law. They were Greeks. They were Galatians. They were up there in Turkey, somewhere up in Anatolia, in the Aegean area. Supposedly, they were never under the law unless they were descendants of those Israelites who were under the law. And all the world then were Israelites. And all the world. You know how in the New Testament, a lot of people have argued as to whether or not we're under the law. And there's a place in the book of, I think, Galatians where he says that, or I think in the book of Romans where he says that every mouth shall be stopped. And all men were under the sin. How could all men be under the sin of Moses' law unless they were all children of Israel? But remember what Peter said. Peter says in, I think it's Peter chapter 1, 1 Peter, it says, I, Peter, I am an ambassador of Jesus Christ to the elect, sojourners of the dispersion of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. Friends, that says it all. Peter says further that you, and he's writing to these people up in Asia Minor, guys, not some 4 or 5 people huddled up in a cave somewhere, but he's writing to those peoples. You are an elect race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people who at one time were not a people, but now are the people of the Lord. Though you've not been shown mercy, but now you're shown mercy. See, this is a reference to the book of Hosea, where it says, I shall scatter my people into all the world like seed. And where it was said, you are not my people, there shall be the sons of the living divine being. Paul is telling these individuals up there that they are the scattered diaspora of the children of Israel. And there's no question of that. Well, Peter was really just retelling, making the same statement that Moses had said, 1400 years prior to that. Where in Exodus, Moses said, therefore, if you are going to obey me and keep my covenant, then you will be a peculiar people, a treasure above all the peoples of the earth. For all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. So you see, Yahweh wanted this holy nation, all these peoples, to be worshiping him. But one thing for sure, he did recognize that these people, this holy nation, was Israel. And here Peter is saying that holy nation, which is all the world, because we're all under sin, and we all were baptized into Moses. And this one holy nation, the one holy nation that Moses spoke of, was now up there in Cappadocia, in Colossia, in Galatia. Now, if you have not grasped this at this point, maybe this will help you. Jesus said in Matthew, go only and preach only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I don't send you to anyone else, because there are no other. Jesus said, I have other sheep, but they're not of his fold, but they're still of the house of Israel. I only want you to go to the house of Israel, my sheep. So, when you see this happening, John, Paul, and Peter, specifically singling out the area up around Asia Minor, Italy, Greece, as the children of Israel, the diaspora. Should we then conclude, like many, that that is the only children of Israel? Absolutely not. It is simply the first group of individuals that Paul went to preach to. And why? Paul tells you the answer. He says that the gospel was to the Jew first and also to the Greek. The Jew first and also to the Greek. So, you see, the gospel had to go first to those who were of that royal descent, because they were the rulers and could alter the entire destiny of man by giving men and opening up these truths and presenting these ancient mysteries to the people. And this is where, in the Greeks, or the Greek-speaking nations up at Athens and Eleusis, they created the Eleusinian mysteries, which we will explain is the original great mysteries that Plato and Pythagoras studied. It was the mysteries that all of the world followed in dance and happiness and bliss for a long time, until this whole thing where Jesus comes to the world and they reject him and return to their hypocritical faith of the law, which Paul says mankind would turn back in an apostasy until the time of the end. So what was these Eleusinian mysteries we now know were children of Israel?